Hello and welcome. Today we're going to cover everything about McCombs application process, from essays to video interview and peer interview. So we're going to get started immediately. But before we move forward, I just want to remind you that we host videos like this on various different topics about the MBA application journey every single week on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Eastern time. If you've been following us, well, thank you for following us. And if you're new here, I encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and our LinkedIn page so that you can be notified when new events are being released. Reminded to rewatch series that you have missed that will help in your MBA application process. So with that, why don't we get started right into the MBA application for McCombs. McCombs attract ambitious professionals who want to be at the intersection of business, technology, and innovation. The school's motto, "What starts here changes the world," isn't really aspirational. It's the expectations of what the school has for its MBA students, and it's also the filter through which your application will be evaluated. McCombs evaluates not just whether you are capable of succeeding in the MBA program, but whether you are contributing to the innovation-driven culture of Austin. On the surface, McCombs' application looks quite approachable: 2 essays, a video assessment, and an optional peer interview. But in reality, each component is designed to probe: do you have the clarity of purpose? Do your values translate into action? And will you adapt to a thriving community and collaborative community and entrepreneurial environment at McCombs? That's what we're going to be diving into more details today. And if you have questions, definitely feel free to ask them in the comments or message us if you're watching this as a replay. McCombs' application pool overlaps with Haas, Anderson, and other top US business schools. You're competing against candidates with strong credentials and impressive resumes, just like yours. What sets McCombs apart and what the admission team is really screening for is how well you connect your story to Austin's innovation economy. You don't need to be an innovator, but you do have to have that spirit. Austin is a hub for tech, venture capital, healthcare innovation, energy transition, and the creative economy. And McCombs expects its MBA students to be fluent in this environment, be able to succeed in this kind of ecosystem. At the application level, narrative cohesion is what breaks the tie. Technical polish or lofty ambitions or being super vague or trying to be malleable by demonstrating that you are flexible with your career journey isn't what what's going to move the needle. Whether that's going to show up in your essays, your videos, or recommendations, these details or these lack of details, for lack of a better word, won't tell a story that aligns with culture and the Austin's ecosystem, and therefore you may miss the opportunity to be admitted to this program if you're not really being specific. And we'll talk more about that in the next few slides. So the admission lens at McCombs is threefold. First, human-centered collaboration. McCombs wants candidates who build with others, share credit, and elevate teams. We understand that nothing is built in silos, and you have to be someone who is willing to accept that and verbally, verbally talk about it and behave in certain ways that communicate that. Second, an innovation mindset. Whether you are in finance and consulting, energy, healthcare, the expectation is that you'll bring fresh ideas, fresh thinking, and entrepreneurial problem solving. McCombs alumni are not just employees, they are really change agents. And that's not something that McCombs necessarily built. It's what they come with, and McCombs nurtures them to get and become the change makers that they aspire to become. And third, Austin is an amplifier. Few MBA programs sit in this fertile ecosystem with startups, VC, Fortune 500 relocations, healthcare innovation, creative industries that are attainable. There are schools that do offer these components, but admission rates are in low single digits. McCombs screens for whether you'll thrive in and contribute to that environment. So if your story doesn't make sense in Austin, it won't make sense at McComb. And your real question here is really, did you spend enough time reflecting and making sure that you have chosen the right school first and foremost, and then communicating that this is the right school for you in the context of all the components of the application. So we're going to dive into the components of the application, starting with the first essay, which asks, why an MBA now and why McCombs, in 250 words. This is definitely going to be tough to do, but it is doable. The strongest answers for this question do three things. First, they link your personal and professional growth, showing that your career and life journey naturally build towards this moment where you are today, which is applying to business school. Second, they make the timing clear. Why now? Not 2 years ago, not 5 years into the future. Why is it now the right time for you to do an MBA? And third, they show why McCombs is not a generic choice. And generic is the key word here. You need to map your goals into the McCombs and Austin's ecosystem, whether that's the Energy Institute, Texas Venture Lab, or Austin's startup scene. The AdCom wants to know, do you see McCombs as a platform for your professional trajectory, or are you just applying broadly and haven't really taken the time to understand what specifically McCombs offers you? These details are really non-negotiable. If you want to get in, you must communicate in detail what the McCombs ecosystem, holistically and its geography, offer you in terms of helping you get to where you want to go. The second essay asks to reflect on a core value that defines you. Share an example, how it has guided your decisions and action, and how it will shape your contributions at McCombs. This is not a space also for abstract ideas. You need a concrete value, whether that's integrity, resilience, curiosity, inclusion, and then a lived example where that value drove your behavior, especially under pressure. The AdCom wants to see not just what you claim to believe, because, as the saying goes, words are cheap, but they want to see proof, actions that you have acted on the values that you say you embody. And that's when you are demonstrating effectively that the value that you are articulating. And the final piece, linking this value to your contribution at McCombs, is what most candidates miss in this process. Don't just say that you value inclusion. Show how you'll foster it at McCombs collaborative culture, or in McCombs collaborative culture. Don't just say you value innovation. Show how you'll bring that energy into Austin's entrepreneurial ecosystem. The important point is that whatever value you share from the beginning, communicate how it has presented itself in a real scenario, and then take it to the future in terms of how that value will be valuable in the McCombs ecosystem. That linkage makes the essay forward-looking and a distinctive asset that will make you stand out in your McCombs applications. Now we have the video assessment. Most schools have interviews that are virtual or in person, that are live with another human on the other side. A couple of years ago, McCombs decided to pivot from this idea and has introduced the video interview questions that everyone receives a couple of days after you submit. You will have to answer 5 questions, and for each question, you will have 1 to 3 minutes to give your response. This is not a place where you are going to be reading off a script. You will have to know your story and be able to answer questions that are presented on the screen that are, some of them are at random. But they are framed just like an interview is. Therefore, you will have some expectations in terms of what the interview questions would look like. If this is something that you struggle with, whether you're going through McCombs or you're going through other interviews for other schools, we do offer interview support in our coaching support process. That's only for interview preparation. And if that's something that you are interested in, I encourage you to reach out to book a consultation and see if that's something that if our offering is something that you're looking for. So let's continue. So what McCombs is testing here is spontaneity, clarity, and presence. If you think of yourself as a future leader leading a Fortune 500 company, you will be interviewed, you'll be asked questions impromptu, and you need to know your story at all times. And this is how you're starting to communicate that and showing up as that future leader in the context of your MBA interview for McCombs. So the questions are, in terms of what the admission team is asking, is, can you communicate your ideas succinctly? Can you articulate your values and goals without a script? Can you bring energy across camera in the same way you would in recruiting for a job or an internship or in a classroom setting? This component is not really about having that perfect answer, having that perfectly polished, outward-facing response. It's really about authenticity and fluency in the way you communicate. Treat it like an actual interview. Know your core stories, know your goals, and be ready to connect all of those back to McCombs' cultural and I guess more of its culture. And this should be kind of thought of as, while you're doing these videos, you should definitely think of there's someone on the other side watching this, even if you don't see them personally. Now, the second component that also unique to McCombs is that they have a peer interview that is also optional. But in practice, if you choose not to pursue this, it's really a missed opportunity. And we don't recommend not taking advantage of optional opportunities to communicate who you are. We always say there's only one thing in the application that's optional, and that is extenuating circumstances. If you don't have any, don't make them up. So outside of that, all the optional pieces are not really optional from our eyes. And we have seen the success of that in being able to have such a high conversion for our clients, and them being able, by answering everything, by taking the time to really articulate their story effectively, they have been able to present a cohesive, a holistic story of who they are to the admission committee. So here for the peer interview, McCombs, I want you to think that McCombs is explicit about its human-centered culture, and this peer interview is their way of testing whether you show up with authenticity in that environment. So this is not a high-pressure consulting case. It's a short collaborative conversation where you get to demonstrate your values you've written about in your essays with another peer. What they're looking for, what the peer is looking for is, can I see you as a valuable asset in the McCombs community? They're asking, are you approachable? Do you listen well? Can you build rapport quickly with others? Those are really important elements that they're looking for. And by participating, you're also signaling genuine interest to McCombs. That you're willing to invest the time to engage fully, even in something that is optional. For an outcome balancing yield considerations, that signal really is meaningful to them, because it determines who is really putting all they got into the application versus those who are, haphazardly applying across many different schools. And it's always very evident in the quality of the material and how you show up, of course. Okay, so a few missteps that applicants make. There's always some that, we always say, you don't know what you don't know. And that's why we have built this entire library of resources, particularly on our YouTube channel, that are there all to support applicants who are going through this process, especially those who are going on their own, because you don't necessarily have the coach who's telling you, these are important things that you need to do preemptively before you realizing that you have made the mistake. So this is a great opportunity to remind you to join and connect with us, subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can be notified about events, but also access our library of past events that can be helpful in the context of where you're going. So some missteps that applicants make, the first is writing that generic why an MBA, why McCombs essay. That could apply to, of course, any school. If an answer works for Haas, for Anderson, and McCombs, it's probably not strong enough for McCombs. Not that the core itself is wrong. So if your goals are, that school agnostic, obviously, but the why McCombs component can't be exactly the same as why Anderson or why Haas. So pay really close attention to articulating why McCombs is the right place for you. Second, naming a value in essay 2, but failing to back it up with proof of lived experience or lived action. If the value hasn't guided real decision, it won't resonate with the outcome, and it's really not a value worth talking about, because if it's a real actual value, you would have embodied it in the way that you work with others. So if you're having a hard time to do this, this is really a great time to start and reflecting back on your experiences, and also consider working with someone to help you navigate this process. Because if you are unable to do this effectively, it obviously delays your application journey, it delays your career journey, especially if you don't get in anywhere the time that you apply. So if that's something that you are looking for, definitely reach out for a consultation to see how our approach may be helpful in your application journey. And third, underestimating the video assessment and peer interview. Too many applicants see them as afterthoughts. And because this comes immediately after your application submission, you have to really prepare more faster than most applicants who wait a couple of weeks before they hear from other schools. These are the only proxies in the context of how the admission will be able to assess how you will show up in class, in teams, and in recruiting. And you absolutely cannot treat them lightly, as you will lose points in your application process and risk your admission. And one of the things that you always have to remember, until you have admission somewhere, all of the schools you are applying to matter. So don't treat any one of them lightly if you have chosen effectively which schools you want to apply to. So let's talk a few cases here. I'm going to just illustrate two clients, how in their cases strategy beat surface level metrics that often applicants have a tendency of relying heavily on. The first was candidates who had already pivoted. This was a candidate who had already pivoted twice. First was in the travel industry, then in corporate catering. And now they wanted to move into product management. The risk was obvious, of course. Would McCombs see another pivot as credible or as instability? And of course, the risk that employers would do the same. So what we did, how we coached this client is we reframed her story around purpose and skill transfer. We showed how her work had always involved cross-functional collaboration, client management, and aligning diverse stakeholders to a macro level vision. Instead of randomness, her narrative became a consistent trajectory of building products and services with impact in the communities that she was a part of. McCombs not only offered her an admission, but she also was awarded $60,000 in scholarship to the program. The second was a reapplicant with a physics background. He had moved from the aerospace into operations at a tech startup. He had essentially a below 3.0 GPA, demanding schedule in his startup world because the startup was nascent and there was just a lot of things going on. Limited time for applications, obviously, it's always that piece. And the GRE that he submitted wasn't standout. It wasn't bad, but it was definitely not standout. So the biggest challenge was signal management. We had to highlight discipline, problem solving under pressure, and resilience. We emphasized his ability to bridge technical and operational roles and his commitment to growth since his prior application as a reapplicant. He was admitted with a $10,000 scholarship and funding. In both cases, the deciding factor was not perfect stats. It was coherence of story, aligning each candidate's path with McCombs' innovation ecosystem and collaborative culture. And that really was, we believe, because if we look at the stats, it wasn't necessarily, standout, and they didn't necessarily have brand name institutions. We believe it really was a story that was a turning point for them, that they were able to effectively communicate to McCombs what value they brought to the community that enabled them to not only get in, but also scholarship, which often is merit-based scholarship evaluation. The bottom line is this: McCombs isn't admitting resumes. It's admitting people who have, who can thrive, who thrived and will thrive in Austin's innovative ecosystem, contribute to its collaborative culture, and scale their impact beyond themselves. Now, if you, as you're going through your application, have a lot of doubts in your ability to communicate your experiences effectively, I encourage you to book a consultation. This is a way we pressure test fit and build a candidacy that definitely can't be ignored in the application, irrespective of where you apply. For ongoing insight, continue to follow us on YouTube and LinkedIn. And if you want live structured guidance, we have the MBA Strategy Circle that we host live sessions, talk about everything concerning the MBA application journey. And that happens every other week, where you can, come in, ask questions, see what questions others have, learn from their questions as well, because inevitably down the line, you will be asking those same questions yourself. So now let's move to the Q&As that have come through in the registration. All right, so the first question is, most of my work is solo. How do I show I will thrive in a team culture? Even though most applicants, or not most applicants, even in this case that your work is solo, you're going to want to focus a lot on reflecting how did you work with others to get the project off the ground, get the work that you need to do done. If you work for an organization, I don't believe that you work solo entirely. Your work may be in isolation, but you are collaborating with others. So your job as an applicant is to reflect where those opportunities have been and communicate that in the application. This is oftentimes where we can come in as a resource to you, because some of the things that we help applicants do is really take the time to reflect, ask a lot of questions to help them remember oftentimes those opportunities where they had a chance to demonstrate the elements that we're looking for them to include in their application, that on the surface level, they may not necessarily see it as such. So I encourage you to reach out if that's something that you're struggling with. Okay, next question. I come from a less common industry. How do I prove I can still succeed in the consulting path many McCombs grads take? Absolutely. So we have helped a lot of applicants navigate, this consulting pathway, especially if they're coming from non-traditional backgrounds. One of the pieces that I always emphasize is that your experiences are extremely valuable. So just because you're not a consultant or in finance or in tech does not mean that your work is not valued. And especially in consulting, that they get to work with a lot of different companies, a lot of different problems. You bring a new and fresh perspective, or you can bring a new and fresh perspective to that community. So your job is really to dive deep into what your experiences have been, communicate them in a way, especially if it's non-traditional, in a way that the admission team can understand, and also showcase the value that you bring to the cohort itself. So in the classroom, in your peer discussions, but also in your future job in consulting. So definitely don't underestimate your experiences, but your job as an applicant is to dive deeper into those experiences, translate them in a way that connect to the admission team's evaluation criteria. Maybe one quick last question, and then we can bring this to a close. When sharing career setbacks, how do I show resilience in line with the school's values without sounding like I am making excuses? You shouldn't be making excuses if you are demonstrating resilience. Resilience is essentially, I've had these setbacks, and I would I have worked through them and gotten on the other side. So that's not really an excuse. Your job is in terms of those setbacks is to demonstrate what did you learn from them, how did you grow from them, how it has influenced your engagement in work. So reflect deeply on those setbacks and the lessons that you've learned and how that is actually of value, because if you are constantly experiencing wins, the first time you experience any setback, you are going to crumble and fall. So your job is to really communicate that your setbacks are actually an asset. And that obviously comes with reflection and mindset shift. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being here with us today. As a reminder, next week we're going to be moving into interview preparation. October is very interview heavy. And if you're going through the interviews, I encourage you to sign up, ask your questions of some of the biggest struggles that you are experiencing in your interview preparation. And we will integrate them into our presentation and, of course, in the follow-up conversation in the Q&A that follows the presentation. Until next week, good luck with all your applications and see you then.